Why did they always underestimate her? That thought pressed like a splinter as Maya Chen leaned against her old pickup, watching the winter light crawl across the gravel lot of Copper Canyon shooting range. She had been coming here every Wednesday for months, keeping the ritual steady, precise, because routine was safer than chaos, and she needed safe. She told herself it was therapy. The truth was more complicated. She looked like someone who should have been standing at a farmer's market, not carrying a rifle case. Faded jeans, cracked boots, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense tie. She was lean, but it wasn't the lean of gym selfies. It was the kind carved by ranch chores, heavy gaits, and weather that never softened. But in the eyes of strangers, she looked like no one at all. Forgettable. That was the point. The December air bit sharp when she stepped out of the truck. Her breath clouded against the backdrop of the Wind River Mountains, those jagged peaks like silent sentinels keeping watch. She had grown up under them, left them, and now returned, still uncertain if they would welcome her back. 8 months. That was how long she had been driving here each week, showing up before the range filled with weekend hobbyists who wore camouflage as costume. She liked the quiet, the ritual of unpacking, setting up, and letting the sound of controlled shots drown out the noise inside her head. Her doctor had suggested it, Dr. Marcus Webb, the one man who didn't flinch when she told the truth about nightmares. He had said, "You need to find a place where the weapon isn't about survival, where it's about control, focus, breathing, healing." She hadn't believed him, and yet here she was. Pete Garrison emerged from the small range office. Gray beard, sun-creased face, Desert Storm veteran cap pulled low. He had run Copper Canyon for nearly 2 decades, and though his joints complained more than they used to, his voice carried the authority of a man who had been there and done enough. "Morning, Maya," he called. His tone had that casual warmth reserved for regulars. "Cold enough for you." She shifted her rifle case onto one shoulder. "Just right," she answered. But her mind echoed with a voice from years earlier, her grandfather Chen's, the man who had first put a .22 in her hands at the ranch. A rifle is not just a tool, little one. It is responsibility made manifest. Those words stayed with her, even now, long after he was gone. Across the lot, laughter cut through the quiet. 4 college-aged men were unloading cases from a gleaming new SUV, the kind with a lease payment higher than most people's mortgages. Their voices carried in the brittle air. At the center stood Jake Morrison, blond, polished, with a posture that screamed arrogance. "I'm telling you, Tyler, it's all about the equipment," he bragged, hoisting a brand new Barrett like it was an extension of his ego. "My father's new rifle could put down an elk at 900 yards easy." His friends nodded like an audience, lugging heavy cases, tripping over themselves to keep up. Jake's gaze slid across the lot and landed on Maya. He called out with condescending politeness, "Excuse me, miss, are you here for the beginner's safety course? My buddy Tyler could use company in the remedial class." His friends laughed too loudly. Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes, brown, tired, older than her 26 years, held his for a long second. Eyes that had stared down fighters half a world away. Eyes that had measured distance not in yards but in survival. "I'll manage," she said softly. Something in her tone made Jake blink. Not the words, the stillness, but he covered it with another grin and turned back to his friends. Inside, the small office smelled of coffee and gun oil. Behind the counter, Linda Garrison, Pete's wife, offered a smile. "Your usual lane, honey." Maya nodded, sliding cash across the counter. "Lane 20. Always the farthest from the noise, always the quietest." Her rifle case held no sleek carbon fiber, no polished scopes. Just a worn Remington 700 wooden stock rubbed smooth from decades of use. It had belonged to her grandfather. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't expensive. But in the right hands, it spoke truer than anything money could buy. By the time Pete's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, range is hot. Maximum distance today, 1,200 yards due to wind conditions. The SUV crew had already turned the place into theater. Jake scoffed loudly enough for all to hear. 1,200. My grandfather could do that with iron sights. For the next hour, Maya went through her routine, methodical, breathing in, breathing out. Each trigger pull carried the same deliberate rhythm. She wasn't chasing results. She was chasing silence. Every shot was less about the target and more about loosening the knots inside her chest. Meanwhile, the college boys turned their lane into chaos. Shouts, missed shots, laughter too loud, excuses louder still. Jake blamed his scope, then his ammo, then the wind. By his sixth miss at 700 yards, frustration burned across his face. "This scope must be off," he muttered. "There's no way I'm shooting this poorly." Maya almost smiled, almost. By noon, another familiar figure had appeared. Dr. Marcus Webb, tall but slowed by age, carrying his old M1 Garand like an old friend. At 63, he moved with careful precision, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He paused by Maya's lane, studying her calm posture. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "Better," she answered. He nodded, satisfied with the single word. With her, progress was measured not in leaps but in inches. By mid-afternoon, Jake had cycled through 3 rifles, each more expensive than the last, convinced that equipment was betraying him. Tyler, the nervous one with thick glasses, was actually doing better. Jake didn't notice. His ego left no room for humility. At last, Pete's patience frayed. After 15 shooters had come and gone, with results ranging from decent to disastrous, Jake's complaints had worn grooves into the air. "Any snipers here?" Pete barked, exasperation sharp in his voice. "Because apparently nobody else can hit the broadside of a barn today." The words were a joke, a vent of frustration, but they hung heavy, echoing in the cold air. And from lane 20, Maya set her coffee down, slowly, deliberately. She stood, brushing dust from her jeans, and began walking forward. All heads turned. Jake smirked, expecting another hobbyist about to embarrass themselves. Instead, he saw her, a slender woman in worn clothes, walking with a stride that was calm, measured, unshakable. "I'll give it a try," she said. The range went quiet. Jake laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. "You're joking, right, lady? I've been shooting competitively since middle school, and even I'm struggling. I mean, no offense, but there's wind shear out there, atmospheric pressure shifts, parallax issues. Maybe stick to closer targets until you've got more experience." She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked to the equipment rack and selected a standard Remington .308 Winchester. Checked the bolt. Examined the scope. Her movements were precise, almost reverent. "That's a decent rifle," Dr. Webb observed quietly. "But it's not zeroed for you. Could throw your accuracy." "I'll adjust," Maya said. Pete leaned forward from the control station. "What distance you thinking?" 4,200 meters. Her voice was steady. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to hush. Jake's laughter came out brittle. 4,000. That's ridiculous. Nobody makes shots like that without specialized equipment. This isn't a movie." But Dr. Webb didn't laugh. His eyes sharpened, reading the steadiness in her stance. He knew. He had seen that calm before on soldiers who had learned the hard way that hesitation killed. Pete hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maya, I've got targets at 1,800 tops. Winds are gusting 15 miles an hour. Visibility isn't great." "Set something up at 4,200, she said. "Something I can see." Her words landed like stone. Within an hour, word spread. Shooters stopped what they were doing. Cars pulled over along the highway to see what the commotion was about. By the time Pete set an orange cone on a ridge measured at 4,250 meters, nearly 3 dozen people had gathered. Maya lay prone, adjusting her bipod. The distant cone was barely a dot in the haze, her breathing slowed. Her heart rate fell into rhythm. She had done this before, but not for sport, not for an audience. Back then, the stakes were different. Back then, the silence after the shot was not applause. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering. Here and there, she had told Jake earlier when he asked where she had learned to shoot. That was the half-truth. The full truth was something else entirely. Something she hadn't wanted to reveal, not yet. What made her think she could do it? That was the question whispering in the silence as Maya lowered herself against the cold ground, the borrowed Remington steady on its bipod. Around her, the crowd shuffled nervously, drawn closer but holding back, as if some invisible line had been drawn between her and everyone else. Dr. Webb adjusted his spotting scope. His voice carried quiet concern. Winds shifting 10 to 12 miles an hour northwest, inconsistent. Thermals rising off the southern slope, not ideal. Maya nodded once, her cheek pressed to the worn stock. She studied the faint shimmer of heat, the ripple in tall grass between here and the ridge. The cone stood out as a tiny orange fleck against gray rock, 4,200 meters away, 2.6 miles. Jake muttered loud enough for people to hear. This is impossible. No way she even lands within 100 yards. But his voice trembled. Maya tuned him out, her focus narrowed. Breath in, breath out, half breath held. The math unfolded in her mind like an old song she hadn't forgotten. Bullet drop 47 feet. Drift changing by the second. Time of flight just over 3 seconds. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, removing slack. For an instant, everything slowed. The noise of the onlookers faded. Even her memories quieted. There was only the target. The shot broke clean. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The muzzle blast cracked across the range. And then silence. 3 seconds stretched like eternity. Dr. Webb leaned into the scope, his breath catching. Dust jumped beside the cone. The orange shape tilted. My God, his voice cracked. Impact, direct hit. She moved it, she actually hit it. The range erupted. Gasps, shouts, the wild disbelief of people who had just witnessed something they would retell for years. Phones snapped up, capturing grainy video that would never quite prove what their eyes swore had happened. Pete's radio crackled from the ridge where he had driven. Well, I'll be damned. Dead center hit. Took a chunk out of the cone. Got the fragment right here. The crowd roared. Maya didn't. She simply worked the bolt, ejected the spent case, caught it in her hand. She studied the brass as if it were nothing more than another step in her ritual, then slid it into her pocket. Her face remained unreadable. Jake stumbled closer, pale. That was impossible. No one can just. But his words collapsed. Luis Ramirez, her grandmother's old ranch hand and a veteran himself, leaned near. His voice was low, respectful. Miss Maya, that wasn't luck. That was discipline, training, years. She said nothing, only began clearing the rifle. Jake tried again, his arrogance stripped bare, replaced by something else, awe maybe. Where did you learn to do that? Her hands paused. For a fraction of a second, her stillness betrayed her. Dr. Webb caught it. He had seen those pauses before, in soldiers who carried things they never wanted spoken aloud. Maya finally answered with the same softness she had carried all day, here and there. It was enough for now. Pete returned from the ridge, the shattered cone in hand. He looked at her differently than before, not like a customer, but like a soldier recognizing another. Young lady, I've run this range 18 years. What you just did, we need to talk sometime. Because skill like that doesn't come free. It comes with cost. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. He saw something in her gaze, the kind of weight you don't shake off, no matter how many years pass. She broke it first, packing the rifle with mechanical care. But the questions didn't end there. Jake followed, words tumbling out now in a rush. Listen, I was wrong about you. That shot, it's textbook impossible. You have to understand what you just proved. You have to tell me, what kind of military training did you have? Maya zipped the case. Her voice came quiet but firm. I should head home, chores don't wait. It might have ended there, just a miracle shot, just a story for the range. But not everyone watching had come for sport. Clint Rhodes lingered in the shadow of the crowd, arms folded, wiry frame tense with calculation. He wasn't there for entertainment. He was there on behalf of Donovan Westfield, the rancher and developer who had been circling Maya's grandmother's land for years like a vulture waiting for weakness. Quite a show, Rhodes said, his voice smooth but cold. Word travels fast when someone makes noise like this, and military-level marksmanship, from someone with an unexpected background, that makes conversation interesting. Lewis stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Rhodes and Maya. The two men had history, disputes over water rights, whispered threats, nothing direct but never friendly. Just target practice, Lewis said flatly, nothing newsworthy. Rhodes smiled thinly. Oh, I wouldn't say nothing. Miss Chen of the Chen Ranch, County Road 47, property bordering the Riverside Development Area, isn't it? The words hit harder than any bullet. Maya froze, her face settling into the blankness she had once used under interrogation. Controlled, guarded. What's your interest in the Chen property? Lewis demanded. Neighborhood awareness, Rhodes replied, eyes never leaving Maya. Mr. Westfield likes to stay informed, especially about landowners who might affect his business interests. Pete cut in, his patience gone. Show over. This is a range, not a town hall. If you're not here to shoot, clear out. The crowd began to disperse. Rhodes lingered one last moment, his gaze sharp as a knife. Give my regards to your grandmother, Miss Chen. Rosa Chen's quite the pillar of the community. Would be a shame if her peace was ever disrupted. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maya's jaw tightened, but she only said, "Thanks for the message. I'll pass it along." When Rhodes finally turned and left, Lewis muttered under his breath, "That wasn't about shooting. That was reconnaissance." Dr. Webb nodded grimly. "Someone's very interested in you and your family." Maya didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just packed the rest of her things and walked toward her truck, the weight of eyes still burning into her back. From behind her, Jake called out, desperate now, "Will you be back next week?" She paused. Her heart tugged in two directions. To return meant attention, exposure. To stay away meant losing the one ritual that kept her steady. "We'll see," she said finally, and climbed into her truck. The sky had already begun to bleed into twilight, Wyoming winter shadows long across the dirt road. As her tires crunched gravel, Maya felt it, the shift. Something had changed. Something had been revealed. The girl in faded jeans, the quiet ranch hand seeking therapy, had let a glimpse of someone else slip through. Ghost. The call sign had followed her home like an echo. Ghost, the one who had taken missions no one else wanted. Ghost, the one whose silence unnerved even her own unit. Ghost, the one who made enemy snipers disappear into the night. She had buried that part of herself, tried to trade it for normalcy, for the simple rhythm of ranch life. But the rifle in her hands and the eyes now watching her said otherwise. Her grandfather's words came back, steady as stone. The most powerful weapon any warrior can possess is the courage to be exactly who they were meant to be. She wanted peace, but she knew better. Peace was never given, peace was protected. Tomorrow she would decide. Could Maya Chen, the quiet granddaughter, the ranch girl, survive? Or would Ghost have to step from the shadows once more, to protect not just herself but her grandmother's land, her family's legacy, the fragile sanctuary she had been clinging to? For tonight she drove home, headlights cutting through the encroaching dark, carrying a secret that refused to stay buried. Because some people were never meant to vanish. They were meant to be weapons, and the only choice left was simple: who got to aim. Why did the silence of home feel heavier than the gunfire of war? That thought haunted Maya as her pickup rattled down the dirt road, headlights carving through the dark Wyoming twilight. She had made this drive thousands of times before from town back to the ranch, but never had it felt this uncertain. Tonight, she carried more than groceries and empty brass. Tonight, she carried attention. Unwanted, sharp, and dangerous. The Chen Ranch spread wide under the stars, 80 acres of stubborn land that had endured droughts, floods, and now the slow crawl of developers. Her grandmother's house stood at the heart of it, porch light glowing against the night like a lantern refusing to go out. Inside, Rosa Chen sat in her worn rocker, quilt folded over her knees, eyes still sharp despite 81 years. She had been a pillar in Johnson County for as long as anyone remembered, a woman of iron will who had raised Maya after her parents died young. "You're late," Rosa said without looking up, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had weathered too much to be easily shaken. "Range ran long," Maya answered, placing a bag of feed by the door. Her grandmother's gaze flicked to her face, searching. Maya hated that gaze. Rosa could always see through the shield she put up, could always tell when something inside her was unsettled. "What happened?" Rosa asked simply. Maya busied herself with her boots, tugging them off, buying seconds of delay. "Nothing important." But Rosa only raised a brow, silence stretched. Finally Maya sighed. "I made a shot, long one, people noticed." Her grandmother's frown deepened. "Noticed how?" "They'll talk, they already are." Rosa leaned back, rocking slowly. "You went there for healing, not to remind the world who you were." "I didn't plan it," Maya said defensively. "It just happened." "Nothing just happens," Rosa replied softly. "Not with you." The words landed heavy. Maya carried her rifle case to the corner, setting it gently down like an offering. Her chest tightened. She had come here to disappear, but tonight proved she couldn't erase the past so easily. She escaped to the barn, the smell of hay and horses grounding her. Midnight chores steadied her hands, feeding, checking stalls, mending a gate hinge. Work that didn't ask questions. Work that didn't demand answers. But in the shadows of the barn, memory intruded. Sand, heat, a wind carrying dust thick as smoke. The weight of a rifle against her cheek, her breath slow, her heart hammering in her throat as she counted seconds of another impossible shot. A man in her scope, unaware of the ghost watching him. The silence after as the team moved forward under cover of her bullet. Her chest tightened. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the stall, trying to breathe past it. "You can't bury ghosts by pretending they don't exist," Dr. Webb's voice echoed in memory. He had told her that months ago. She hadn't wanted to hear it then. She still didn't. The next morning dawned brittle and cold. Frost clung to fence rails, sparkling under pale sunlight. Maya saddled the bay mare and rode the southern pasture, checking water lines and fencing like she always did. Routine. Habit. But when she reached the far boundary, her gut tightened. Fresh tire tracks cut across frozen ground, wide, deep treads from a truck heavier than any her neighbors used. She dismounted, crouching to study them. The pattern matched the kind roads drove. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. By the time she returned to the house, her grandmother was on the porch, phone in hand, lips pressed tight. "Lawyers again," Rosa said, voice sharp. "Calling about tax assessments, about selling, about how we're blocking progress." Maya's jaw locked. "It's harassment." "It's pressure," Rosa corrected. "And pressure is harder to fight than bullets. At least with bullets you know where they're coming from." Before Maya could answer, Lewis's old Chevy pulled up, dust curling around it. He climbed out, hat in hand, concern etched across his weathered face. "Heard what happened yesterday," he said without preamble. "Words all over town. People saying you hit a target 2.5 miles out, that you embarrassed Morrison's boy and made roads twitchy as hell." Maya exhaled slowly. "That wasn't the plan." Lewis studied her, eyes narrowing. "You know Rhodes doesn't show up for sport. If he was there, Westfield sent him. And if Westfield knows what you can do, he'll use it." Her grandmother stiffened. He's already using every trick he can to take this land. Lewis spat into the dirt. Westfield's got money, lawyers, politicians, but he doesn't scare me and he shouldn't scare you. Maya didn't answer. Fear wasn't the word, it was responsibility. She had seen what men like Westfield did when they wanted something. They didn't ask, they took, and they didn't mind breaking people in the process. That night Maya sat on the porch, rifle across her lap, watching the horizon fade into starlight. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The world felt still, but her mind churned. She remembered her grandfather's words. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying the weight anyway. But she wondered, how many more weights could she carry before she broke? Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came jagged, full of fragments, boots pounding in sand, radios crackling, the sound of her own breath in the dark steadying as she counted wind shifts. A shot breaking, the man falling, her team moving forward. Then the silence afterward, the silence that never left. She woke with her heart racing, sweat cooling on her skin, the old nightmare clawing her back into the present. By dawn, she was already in the barn, working as if motion could banish memory. But as she brushed down the mare, she heard it, a vehicle on the road. Too early for neighbors, too heavy for ranch traffic. She stepped to the door, wiping her hands, and saw it. A black SUV rolling slow along the boundary, tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. It didn't stop, didn't turn in, just crawled by, deliberate, leaving dust and questions in its wake. Maya's grip tightened on the brush. Her instincts screamed. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was surveillance. And she knew one thing for certain. The past she had been trying to escape was about to demand her attention. Again. How many warnings did you ignore before realizing they weren't warnings at all, but messages? That question circled in Maya's head as the black SUV disappeared down the dusty county road. Its tinted windows reflected the winter morning light, offering no faces, no names, just the reminder that someone was watching. She stood by the barn door until the sound of the engine faded into silence. Her hands tightened around the brush she had been holding, knuckles pale, chest tight. Surveillance wasn't random. It was deliberate, calculated. By the time she walked back toward the house, Rosa was waiting on the porch, wrapped in her quilt, sharp eyes fixed on her granddaughter. Saw the car. Maya nodded. They're circling, Rosa said simply, as if talking about coyotes, trying to remind us who's strong and who's weak. Then they've forgotten, Maya replied, voice low. Lewis arrived later that morning, truck door slamming, his boots crunching across frost. He carried a thermos in one hand and a file folder in the other. Town's buzzing, he said, not even bothering with small talk. Word is, Westfield's people are pushing harder than ever. Talk of court filings, survey teams, and you showing that shot yesterday. Well, that gave them a new reason to poke around. Maya frowned. Why? Because now you're not just Rosa Chen's granddaughter. You're someone with history. And men like Westfield, they like to know who they're up against, or who they can use. Lewis handed her the folder. Inside were photocopies of letters, legal notices, tax assessment reviews, offers far below market value, each stamped with Westfield's development company logo. Her grandmother's land had become a target not because of what it was, but because of what it connected. 80 acres stood in the way of a sprawling riverside resort, the kind that would bring tourists and money to the valley and strip it of its quiet forever. Grandma, why didn't you tell me it was this bad? Maya asked, flipping through the pages, frustration prickling. Rosa folded her hands calmly. Because it's my burden, not yours. That's not how this works, Maya said, sharper than intended. Rosa's gaze held steady. You already carry too much. I won't add mine to your shoulders. But the truth was plain. The burden had already shifted. That afternoon, Maya drove into town for supplies. She kept her head low, hat pulled down, but eyes followed her anyway. At the feed store, two men whispered near the counter. their voices dropping when she entered. At the cafe, conversation stilled just long enough for her to notice. Her shot had traveled farther than the bullet itself. Back at the ranch, Dr. Webb was waiting in his old sedan, parked neatly under the cottonwood tree. He carried his spotting scope case, though he hadn't come to shoot. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the porch steps. Maya poured him coffee and handed it over without answering. They sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the wind through dry grass. Finally, Webb said, "You can't keep pretending this is just about therapy. Yesterday wasn't about healing. It was about exposure." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't go there to prove anything." "I know, but you did, and now eyes are on you, the wrong kind of eyes." Maya looked down into her mug, the steam curling upward like smoke. "I don't want to be Ghost anymore." Webb studied her carefully. "Wanting doesn't erase what you are." The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. That night, Rosa's phone rang again. Maya listened from the kitchen as her grandmother's voice shifted from polite patience to clipped irritation. "No, I've told you. The land is not for sale. Not at any price. Do not call here again." When Rosa hung up, her hand trembled slightly. Maya crossed the room and took it. "They're not going to stop." "I know," Rosa said softly, "but neither are we." Sleep eluded Maya again. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening for engines on the road. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every gust of wind through the cottonwoods like footsteps. Sometime past midnight, she gave up. She rose, pulled on boots, and took the rifle from its case. Outside, the air was biting, stars sharp against a frozen sky. She walked the fence line, scanning shadows, each breath measured, every instinct alive. It felt too familiar, too much like patrols overseas, when silence carried teeth and darkness hid more than it revealed. By dawn, she was still awake, eyes burning, body tense. The next day, she drove into Buffalo for feed. As she walked back to her truck, a voice stopped her. "Miss Chen." She turned. Clint Rhodes leaned against his black SUV, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Morning," he said like it was casual, but his eyes carried weight. Maya's hand tightened on the feed sack she carried. "You're on the wrong side of town, Rhodes." "Just running errands," he replied smoothly. Then he tilted his head. "Your shot yesterday, remarkable. Haven't seen precision like that outside certain units." She stared at him, unblinking. He smiled faintly. "Relax, I'm not here to pry, but Westfield, he notices talent, and talent can be valuable." Maya set the feed down in her truck bed. "Tell Westfield I'm not for sale, neither is this land." Rhodes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Everyone's for sale. Question is the price. For some, it's money. For others, it's peace of mind for people they love." Her chest went tight. "Rosa." Rhodes straightened, all easy smiles again. "Think about it. Because if you're not with us, you're in the way. And being in the way, well, you know how that goes." He climbed back into the SUV, the engine purring as it rolled away, leaving exhaust and silence behind. Maya stood frozen, fists clenched. The decision she had been avoiding pressed closer now. Hiding wasn't protection. Pretending wasn't safety. She remembered a night years ago, her team pinned down in a crumbling village. They had argued about whether to hold their ground or retreat. She had said nothing, just picked up her rifle, found her mark, and cleared the way. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it acts. And maybe it was time Ghost acted again. What do you do when they stop hinting and finally show you their teeth? That was the question Maya faced 3 nights after Rhodes found her in town. It started small. A fence line cut, barbed wire curled like an open wound. At first she told herself it could have been stray cattle, but then came the second cut, and the third, always along the boundary nearest Westfield's holdings, always deliberate. By the fourth, she stopped lying to herself. Lewis found her repairing it in the cold dawn, hands raw from the wire, jaw tight with anger. "They're testing you," he said flatly, "pushing to see how much you'll take before you push back." "I know." He crouched beside her, working the pliers with practiced ease. "Westfield doesn't do his own dirty work. Rhodes is the muscle, and when the muscle doesn't get the reaction he wants, things escalate." Maya kept her eyes on the fence, then let them escalate. Lewis studied her, worry carving lines into his weathered face. "And when they come onto this land, when they don't just cut wire but something worse, what then, Maya?" She didn't answer. That evening, Rosa received another letter. This one wasn't from lawyers. No signatures, no letterhead. Just a single page with one sentence typed neatly across it. "Sell now or regret it later." Rosa's hands trembled as she passed it to her granddaughter. Maya read it twice, her stomach knotting. She wanted to tear it, burn it, erase it, but the words stayed etched in her mind. "They won't scare me," Rosa said firmly. "This land has seen worse men than Donovan Westfield." Maya's throat tightened. Her grandmother's defiance filled her with pride and fear, because Rosa wasn't young anymore, and fearlessness didn't stop bullets. That night Maya sat on the porch again, rifle across her knees, listening to the dark. Her senses stretched wide, searching for movement, headlights, the crunch of tires on gravel. She thought about her unit overseas, about the long nights where the only thing between survival and disaster was vigilance. She had been good at it then, too good. And she hated that she was slipping back into it now. At 2 in the morning she saw them, headlights cresting the ridge, too slow to be passing traffic. The beam cut across the fields, pausing, sweeping, then off. Darkness swallowed the land again. They were watching, measuring. She stayed on the porch until dawn, the rifle heavy in her lap, heart heavier still. The next day Dr. Webb came by again. He noticed the fatigue in her eyes before she spoke. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly. "No." He set his scope case down. "Maya, you can't do this alone. Carrying the weight yourself, it's how you've always operated. But this isn't a battlefield, this is home, and home isn't meant to be defended in silence." Her jaw clenched. "If I ask for help, I expose us. More eyes, more questions, more risks." Or, Webb countered gently, "You expose the truth, and truth can be armor too." But armor was heavy. She already carried too much. By evening she was in town again, stocking up on supplies. At the hardware store she caught voices near the back aisle. "Westfield's men were up near Chen's place last night. Rhodes had the lights off." "Think she knows?" "She'll find out or she'll sell. Either way, Westfield wins." Maya froze, fingers curling around the box of nails she held. They weren't even hiding it anymore. The whole town knew what was happening. On her way back to the ranch, she passed the Riverside development site, a skeletal outline of cabins and half-built roads. Machinery sat idle, waiting. A billboard towered above it all. "Coming soon, Riverside Resort. A new future for Johnson County." She pulled over, staring up at the glossy sign. Families smiling. Children laughing in kayaks. All of it built on land stolen from people like her grandmother. Anger simmered low and sharp. Back at the ranch, Rosa waited with tea at the kitchen table. "You've got that look again," she said softly. "What look?" "The one that means you're carrying more than you'll admit." Maya sat heavily. "They cut the fence again, and last night they came close, too close." Rosa's eyes softened. "You can't keep fighting battles alone, Maya." "I'm not a soldier anymore." Her grandmother reached across the table, covering Maya's hand with her own. "Child, you don't stop being who you are because you left the battlefield. You just learn where else you're needed." The words hit deeper than Rosa probably knew. Later that night, the ranch dogs started barking, wild, frantic. Maya grabbed her rifle and bolted outside, scanning the dark. Headlights again. This time closer. Too close. The SUV sat at the edge of the property, engine idling, lights off. Maya raised the scope, breath steady. Through the glass she saw Rhodes behind the wheel, cigarette ember glowing faint in the dark. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't trespassing. He was just watching, daring her to react. She lowered the rifle. Shooting him here would solve nothing. It would only prove his point that she was dangerous, unstable, unfit for the quiet life she wanted. Instead, she stood in the cold, unmoving, until the SUV finally rolled away. When she went back inside, Rosa was waiting in the hallway. "They'll push and push until you push back," her grandmother said quietly. Maya leaned against the wall, the weight of it pressing down. "And when I push back, everything I've tried to leave behind comes with me." Rosa's voice softened, but her eyes stayed steady. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe you were never meant to leave it behind. Maybe you were meant to choose how to use it." Maya closed her eyes. Ghost pressed at the edges of her silence, waiting. She didn't want this, but she knew the truth now. Pretending was no longer an option. Ghost would have to return. How do you know when the line has been crossed? For Maya, it wasn't the cut fences. It wasn't the phone calls. It wasn't even the black SUV parked like a shadow at the edge of their land. It was the fire. It came just after midnight. She woke to the smell of smoke, faint but sharp. The dogs were already frantic, barking at the night. Maya grabbed her rifle and rushed to the porch. Across the pasture, orange flickered against the dark, a hay shed, flames licking skyward, snapping and popping like gunfire. "Grandma," she shouted. Rosa was already in the doorway, nightgown billowing, hand pressed to her mouth. Her eyes widened with recognition, not shock. "They've started." Maya didn't waste breath. She sprinted for the water tank, grabbed the hose, and fought to contain the flames. Lewis's headlights appeared minutes later, his old Chevy barreling into the yard. He leapt out with buckets, cursing under his breath. They fought side by side, choking on smoke, until the fire finally surrendered to blackened ash. The shed was gone, the hay with it, but the house still stood. Lewis wiped his face, streaked with soot. That wasn't kids, that was a message. Maya stared at the smoking ruin, chest heaving. Her hands shook not from exhaustion but from fury. "They want you rattled," Lewis continued. "Want you scared enough to sell or angry enough to slip up. Either way, they win." Rosa stepped closer, her hand on Maya's shoulder. "And what will you do, child? Stay silent while they burn us piece by piece." Maya swallowed hard. Her throat burned with more than smoke. "No, I won't stay silent." But silence had been her shield. Now it was her cage. The sheriff came at dawn, notepad in hand, sympathy painted across his tired face. "Could have been lightning strike," he suggested half-heartedly, "or faulty wiring." Maya glared. On a clear night, in a building with no electricity. The sheriff sighed, lowering his pen. "I know what you're saying, but proving it," he shook his head. "Men like Westfield, they cover their tracks. Unless you've got eyes on him, this'll get buried." Rosa's jaw tightened. "So justice depends on evidence money doesn't erase." The sheriff didn't argue. He just tipped his hat and drove away, leaving behind the smell of smoke and the weight of helplessness. Maya knew then, if justice required proof, she'd have to provide it herself. That afternoon she drove into Buffalo. At the hardware store she bought motion sensors, trail cameras, extra locks. She felt eyes on her as she carried them out, whispers following her steps. By the time she reached the counter, the cashier gave a small nod, not pity but recognition. Everyone knew. At the cafe she spotted Rhodes at the far booth, sipping coffee like a man with no worries in the world. He caught her eye, smiled faintly, and raised his mug in mock salute. Her chest tightened. She walked out without a word. Back at the ranch, she installed the cameras along fence lines at the barn near the sheds. Each click of the mount felt like building a fortress, though she knew it wasn't enough. Against men like Westfield, cameras were warning bells at best. Lewis returned that evening carrying an old radio. "Figured you might need this," he said. Military grade, picks up chatter most folks don't want heard. Maya raised a brow. Where'd you get it? He smirked faintly. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. They set it up in the kitchen, the soft hiss of static filling the silence. Hours passed, uneventful, until just after midnight when a voice crackled through, faint, distorted, but clear enough. She's rattled. Next step, we tighten the screws. Westfield wants her scared, wants her grandmother scared, then they'll fold. Maya's stomach clenched. Lewis's eyes darkened. That's Rhodes, he said quietly. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Hearing it wasn't the same as knowing. Hearing it made it real. She looked at her grandmother, sitting silently at the table. Rosa's hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was iron. They want to frighten us into surrender. They don't know who they're dealing with. Maya closed her eyes. Ghost pressed closer now, whispering like an old habit she had tried to bury. You know how to stop them. You've always known. The next day, Rosa insisted on going into town for supplies. Maya wanted to refuse, but Rosa's voice was firm. If I hide, they've already won. So Maya drove her. At the grocery store, whispers trailed them. Some offered nods of respect, others avoided their eyes. At the checkout, a man muttered just loud enough. Should have sold while you had the chance. Maya turned, gaze sharp enough to cut, but Rosa touched her arm. Not here, her grandmother murmured. On the way back, the black SUV appeared again. Behind them this time, headlights steady, never passing, never falling back. Maya's grip tightened on the wheel. Rosa sat silent, but her lips moved, whispering a prayer. Maya slowed, so did the SUV. She pulled over to the shoulder. Gravel crunched under their tires. The SUV stopped 20 yards back, engine idling, windows black. Maya stepped out, boots crunching. Her breath fogged in the cold. She walked halfway between the vehicles, stopping in the center of the road. She stood tall, rifle slung across her back, hands steady at her sides. The SUV didn't move. She waited 30 seconds, a minute. The engine revved, then the vehicle reversed slowly, tires spitting gravel before turning and driving away. When Maya climbed back into the truck, Rosa was staring at her. You can't scare men like that, her grandmother whispered. You can only stop them. Maya's throat tightened. I know. That night, Maya sat at the table long after Rosa had gone to bed. The radio hissed softly beside her. The cameras blinked faintly on the monitor. She stared at the maps spread across the wood, boundary lines and access roads marked in red. Every instinct screamed what came next. Surveillance, counter-surveillance, strike before they strike. It wasn't ranch work, it was combat. And she hated how natural it felt to plan for it. But hatred didn't change the truth. Ghost was awake now. When does defending turn into fighting? Maya asked herself that as she studied the camera footage in the dim kitchen light. The grainy night vision clips showed shapes moving along the fence line. Not coyotes. Men. 2 of them, cutting wire, testing gates. She watched them linger near the barn before slipping back into the dark. Proof. She should have felt relief, but instead, something colder filled her. Because proof meant escalation. Proof meant she was no longer just waiting for the next move, she was being invited to respond. And she would. The next morning, Lewis found her in the shed packing gear that hadn't seen daylight since she left the service. Range finder, NVGs, a battered pack filled with tools and rations. She laid them out with quiet precision, hands steady even as her heart ached at the familiarity. Lewis's eyes darkened. So it's true, Ghost is coming back. Maya paused, then shook her head. I don't want her to. Want doesn't matter, Lewis said. They've already decided who you are. The question is whether you prove them right or show them they made a mistake. That night she didn't sit on the porch. She disappeared into the pasture, camouflaged by shadows, her rifle slung across her back. She moved like she once had overseas, slow, deliberate, breathing with the land. At midnight, headlights appeared, the SUV again creeping along the boundary. But this time she was waiting. Through the scope she saw roads behind the wheel, lit faintly by the dash glow. Another man sat passenger. They stopped at the southern fence, stepped out and began talking low. She couldn't hear, but body language told enough, pointing, gesturing toward the ranch house. Maya steadied the crosshairs on the hood. She could disable the vehicle, send a message. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Then she pulled back. Not yet, not like this. Instead, she reached into her pack, pulled a small infrared flare and cracked it. The sudden light burst in their periphery, bright red against the dark, impossible to miss. Roads froze, scanning. The passenger cursed. They spun, searching for the source, but Maya was already slipping back into the night. When the SUV roared away, dust rising behind it, she exhaled. Message sent. Back at the house, Rosa was waiting in her rocker as if she had known. "They'll understand you're not prey now," she said softly. Maya lowered her rifle, "or they'll hunt harder." Her grandmother's eyes were steady. "Either way, you've chosen." The following day, word spread through town. People whispered about something strange near Chen Ranch, red lights, spooked men, rumors of rifles in the dark. Jake Morrison even cornered her at the feed store, wide-eyed. "Was that you?" he asked, voice half awe, half fear. She only looked at him, said nothing. Silence was answer enough. By evening, Rhodes made his move. Maya heard the engine before she saw it, the SUV rolling into the ranch yard, tires crunching gravel. He stepped out casually, hands empty, smile sharp. "Evening," he called, like he was greeting a neighbor. Louis moved forward, but Maya stopped him with a hand. She stepped off the porch, rifle slung loose but visible. "You've been busy," Rhodes said smoothly. "Nice little light show last night, creative." Maya didn't answer. He tilted his head. "You've got skills, more than skills. Westfield respects that. He could use that. Imagine no more threats, no more games. You join his team and all this pressure, gone." Maya's jaw tightened. "Not interested." Rhodes' smile thinned. "You think this is about choice. It's not. You're in the way, and when someone's in the way, they get moved, one way or another." Her eyes locked on his, unflinching. "Try it." For a moment the mask slipped. His gaze hardened, calculating. Then he chuckled, stepping back. "You've got fire, I'll give you that, but fire burns out, and when it does, all that's left is ash." He climbed into the SUV, engine growling as he pulled away. Louis spat into the dirt. "He's rattled." Maya shook her head. "No, he's testing, and next time he won't come alone." That night she spread maps across the kitchen table again. Access points, sight lines, choke points. She sketched arcs of fire, marked where the cameras overlapped. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a perimeter. Rosa sat silently across from her, watching. Finally, she said, "I remember when you were little. You'd set up toy soldiers in the yard, make them defend the chicken coop like it was a fortress. Your grandfather laughed, but I knew. Even then, you saw the world as a battlefield." Maya's pen stilled. Her grandmother reached across the table, her old hand covering hers. "This isn't who you became, child. This is who you always were." Maya swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. When the radio crackled later that night, the voice was urgent. "Meeting tomorrow. Westfield wants pressure increased. Rhodes says the old woman is the weak link. If she breaks, the girl folds." Maya's blood ran cold. Rosa. She shut the radio off, sitting in silence, her hands trembling against the wood. For years she had told herself she fought overseas because it was duty. Now she knew better. This here home was the real duty. Protecting her grandmother wasn't just survival, it was everything. And if that meant Ghost had to step into the light again, so be it. She rose, went to her rifle, and began cleaning it with methodical care. Each stroke of the cloth was a vow. Not again, she thought. Not like before, fighting for politics she didn't believe in. This time it would be different. This time it would be personal. When the bolt clicked back into place, her reflection stared back from the steel, tired eyes, steady hands, the quiet girl from Lane 20 gone. Ghost was looking back. What do you do when they finally come? Maya didn't have to wait long for the answer. It was 3 nights after Rhodes' visit when the sky was ink black and the cold bit deep. The ranch lay silent. Rosa slept in her room, her breathing steady. Lewis was camped in his truck by the north fence, shotgun across his lap, and Maya sat awake at the kitchen table, rifle within reach, maps spread like a playbook. The radio crackled first. Static, then a voice, urgent and low. Tonight, push them hard, burn them out if you have to. Westfield wants it finished. Maya's chest tightened. No more threats, no more warnings. Tonight it was happening. She rose, grabbed her pack, and moved through the house with quiet efficiency. Out the back door, across the frosted yard, into the tree line. The cameras she had set days earlier blinked faintly, their feeds transmitting to the small monitor in her pocket. Shapes moved in the distance. 3 vehicles, lights off. Men stepping out, carrying more than tools this time. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat settled. The part of her she had buried, the part that had lain still and patient in Afghan dust, that had counted heartbeats between shots, rose like a tide. Ghost was awake. She climbed the ridge above the southern pasture, prone against the frozen ground, rifle steady. Through her scope, she counted 6 men moving toward the barn. Rhodes among them, cigarette ember glowing like a red eye in the dark. She marked distances in her head, calculated wind drift, not to kill, not yet, to control, to remind. She squeezed. The round shattered the ground 2 feet from Rhodes' boots. Dirt spat upward. The men froze. Sniper, someone shouted. Panic rippled. One man dropped behind a water trough. Another spun, scanning with a flashlight, until Maya's second shot blew the light from his hand. Rhodes barked orders, trying to gather them, but the fear was already in their bones. They weren't soldiers. They weren't trained for this. They were hired muscle, and hired muscle bleeds courage fast when it realizes it's being hunted. Pull back, Rhodes shouted finally, his voice cracking. Engines roared to life. Headlights snapped on, sweeping frantic arcs as the men scrambled into vehicles. Tires spun gravel. Within seconds, dust and tail lights were all that remained. Maya exhaled slowly, bolt sliding back with practiced ease. 1 magazine, 2 shots, no casualties, message delivered. But the message wasn't just for them, it was for her. She walked back to the ranch as dawn began to bleed over the horizon. Lewis met her in the yard, eyes wide, breath fogging. Heard shots, thought. They're gone, Maya said simply. He studied her, then nodded. Ghost, he whispered, half in awe. Rosa stood on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, her face unreadable. As Maya approached, her grandmother's eyes searched hers, seeing not just the granddaughter but the soldier. You made your choice, Rosa said softly. Maya's throat tightened. I didn't want this. I know, Rosa replied. But sometimes child wanting peace doesn't bring it. Sometimes you have to carry the storm to protect the calm. The sheriff arrived mid-morning, called by neighbors who had heard the gunfire. He asked questions, took notes. But when Maya showed him the camera footage, the tire tracks, the letters, his face hardened. This is more than a land dispute now, he said quietly. This is criminal. I'll take it to the county, maybe higher. But Maya knew better. Men like Westfield didn't fall because of law. They fell because someone stood in the gap, refused to move, refused to break. By evening, town already buzzed with stories. Some said she had fired warning shots. Others claimed she had dropped men in the dark. None of them knew the truth, but the legend spread faster than facts. Ghost had returned. That night she sat with Rosa on the porch, the horizon burning orange as the sun sank behind the mountains. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Rosa broke the silence. When your parents died and I raised you, I used to pray you'd live a quiet life, that you'd never know the weight of violence, but you did, and you carried it with honor, and now you carry it here. Maya blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. I don't want to be remembered as ghost. Rosa's hand found hers, old and strong. Then don't. Be remembered as Maya Chen, the girl who wouldn't sell, the woman who stood when others bowed. Ghost is just the name the world gave you, but Maya is who you are. The words settled deep. Later, as stars filled the sky, Maya walked the fence line again. Not with fear, but with resolve. She knew roads would come back. Knew Westfield wasn't finished. This wasn't victory, it was reprieve. But it was enough. She stopped at the southern ridge, looking out over the land, the barn, the pastures, the house where her grandmother still lived. Her home. A rifle hung from her shoulder, but her grip was loose. She didn't need to fire tonight. Not every defense came from bullets. Some came from presence, from standing, from refusing to move. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke long faded. She thought of the fire, the fear, the weight of the rifle in her hands. And she thought of the impossible shot at the range, the one that had pulled her into the light again. She hadn't wanted it then, but maybe she needed it now. Because some people weren't meant to disappear. Some people were meant to be reminders. That strength doesn't always shout. That dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.